coming up on A Culture of Care with Debbie Garner.
People who are investigating child exploitation are sitting at their desk every day watching children be raped. And watching that is different than showing up at a crime scene after that's occurred and you didn't have to watch that. Told one of his classmates, who he only knew from class, he said, "I'm 2 pounds away from an 8-pound trigger pull." And so that person that he told, he took his gun that night. That is not how you are going to view this. This is not trouble. You would have a dead officer on your hands if he had not spoken out. And they knew that they would never get to them, and they knew that children were not getting the help that they needed. And the images are horrific, but knowing they would never get to kids that they knew needed their help tore them up.
Welcome to Harmless, the podcast. I'm your host, Eric Oldenburg. And today, I'm having a conversation with a retired ICAC commander. Now, I specifically picked this retired ICAC commander as my first interview of an ICAC commander, which I just said too many times. The reason I selected Debbie Garner is because although I didn't know her very well, I still don't know her as well as I'd like to. Her reputation precedes her. Her reputation for caring. Her reputation for understanding the complexities of this job and having empathy. Debbie set up a system in her ICAC unit that allowed people to speak freely. And this is rare in this community. Now, I have to say, in this interview, I was so compelled by Debbie's perspective that emotion got the best of me, and I have dropped a couple of F-bombs in a very, I would say, impassioned soapboxing, if you will. And I thank you, Debbie, for indulging my misbehavior. But I am so absolutely enthralled by the fact that she set up a system that put caring first. It put people first. It put humans first. I recently wrote a joke, and I want my harmless listeners to hear the joke first. Now, it's not complete, but I think it embodies exactly the point I want to get across. Here's the joke. How do you mess with a really passionate cop? Give him a heartfelt compliment. And you're going to see a recurring theme throughout this podcast episode is me trying to lob compliments and credit to Debbie. And Debbie absolutely does her best job to hold these compliments. I'm so proud to know Debbie Garner. This is the first of 2 interviews I've had with her so far. Debbie is also a founding member of Raven. And if you're in the ICAC world, or if you're not in the ICAC world, Debbie, in my next interview with her, will explain to you all about what Raven is and what they do. I'm so very thankful for Debbie's candor, but more importantly, I'm thankful for the fact that her culture of care, the culture of care that she created and manifested, has saved the lives of human beings. And that's what this podcast is about. So if you are an ICAC commander listening to this, listen to what Debbie has to say. Take it to heart and implement it. Why would you not? So without further ado, I give you A Culture of Care with Debbie Garner. First of all, I am super happy to have you on the podcast. You and I have known each other and seen each other around the child exploitation investigative world, and I've heard your name and I've heard about you, but I've never really got to hear your story from you. Thank you for being willing to do this.
Thank you for having me. And I know probably a lot of your listeners are going to be law enforcement, but I hope it also educates the public because I think it's important.
So Debbie, tell me, how did you get into law enforcement? And then how'd you go from law enforcement into crimes against children?
I got into law enforcement. I actually did not have law enforcement in my family. That wasn't necessarily, it's not a legacy or anything. I actually wanted to be a pilot in the Air Force, and I was an Air Force ROTC in college. I was too short to be a pilot. And I remember talking to the cadre supervising the ROTC program. And through talking with them, I knew that I did not want a normal job. I'll admit I'm a little bit of an adrenaline junkie. I like adventure. I also liked putting the pieces of the puzzle together, like logical fact of gathering investigations. And so through talking with them, they said, hey, why don't you go into investigations, major in criminal justice? So I went to the University of Georgia. I switched my major to criminal justice. I never actually entered the Air Force. And when I majored in criminal justice, I was required to do an internship in order to graduate. And so I did my internship with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. And about 6 months later, I was hired. So in law enforcement, I will readily admit, answering calls for service, pulling people over didn't really appeal to me. Being in a patrol car, that sort of thing, was not really the realm of law enforcement that I wanted to pursue. So the GBI, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, really was more what I wanted to do. It was an investigative work. We did not have a trooper element in the GBI. That is a completely different agency in Georgia, the Georgia State Patrol. And the director of the GBI is appointed by the governor. So we are actually part of the executive branch. We do not have original jurisdiction in many crimes, but we do have original jurisdiction in child exploitation crimes. For example, if there's an officer-involved shooting or a homicide or a rape, we have to be requested by the agency that has original jurisdiction to assist them. So we are an assist-only agency, with the exception of a few crimes, and child exploitation is one of them. And we have 15 regional offices throughout the state of Georgia, and then specialty offices. And in the latter part of my career, I managed one of the specialty offices, which was the Child Exploitation and Computer Crimes Unit. But I joined the GBI as an undercover narcotics agent, just to show you how much law enforcement has changed. I was hired at 21 to drive all over the state of Georgia and buy crack undercover in my personal car for $17,000 a year. I got paid mileage, but yeah, in my personal car. So undercover narcotics, but throughout my career, I had a variety of assignments. I worked healthcare fraud for many years. I helped manage our fusion center and helped manage the terrorism intelligence portion of that capacity. And I helped manage our Atlanta field office, where they investigate all types of crimes, like I was talking about: rape, robbery, homicide, political corruption, officer-involved use of force. But again, we didn't have original jurisdiction. We were assisting local agencies. And then the last assignment of my career was as the special agent in charge of GBI's Child Exploitation and Computer Crimes Unit. And whoever holds that position in the GBI is also the ICAC Commander for the state of Georgia. So I was the ICAC Commander, the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Forces. I was the ICAC Commander for the state of Georgia for 8 years, from 2013 to when I retired in October of 2021.
I would imagine that, being the ICAC commander is probably the most fulfilling of all the work that you've done.
It absolutely was. Favorite assignment.
Before you became the ICAC commander, had you done any child crime investigations?
I had not. I supervised agents that were working child abuse investigations, but that was not their primary caseload. It was mixed in with a lot of other types of cases. And I learned about how to conduct those investigations from the people I was supervising. When I left, we had about 35 employees between sworn special agents and non-sworn digital forensic investigators, and then administrative personnel. The person that triaged our cyber tips used to be an intelligence analyst and moved into a role of full-time triaging cyber tips. But I learned from them by reading case files, reading their search warrants, asking them questions. When I first started, there were 180 affiliate agencies that were part of the task force. And when I left, there were about 260 agencies that were part of the task force. It was very difficult for us to get people into introductory training or undercover chat training, so we developed our own. So I attended that type of training. And being totally honest, the agents really made the content, but I was supervising that curriculum and learned it as I went. I learned how to investigate these types of crimes in a variety of ways through reading their search warrants prior to taking them to be signed. So I was part of that process. I helped to triage priority 1, priority 2 cyber tips. So it was a mix of learning, but I don't know how you can supervise a work unit without understanding the types of cases that they're working, whether it's child exploitation or not.
Okay, so now you're the ICAC commander and you're starting to
Mhm.
learn this, and you said through reading search warrants and things like that. How did that feel when you started reading this stuff, going from buying dope and all these other things that are probably in the big scheme now from our perspective, not
Right.
nearly as important? How did that feel as that was like unfolding in front of you? Holy cow, what was that like?
So I remember, I guess I'll talk about it in a couple of different ways. Investigatively, in realizing the content, and the type of crime that we're investigating, and then administratively. So, content wise, I was told that the content is horrible, it's horrific. And I was introduced to it fairly slowly. They knew that they just didn't really need to just show people CSAM right off the bat. But as I was reading search warrants and reading the descriptions of the images, which I did before actually viewing CSAM, I was warned, I was told by people who had worked those cases, people I was supervising, they were trying to describe to me, and they even described to me probably what some of the feelings I would have will be.
Have you ever had a police assignment that they've done that? Is there any other police assignment where that you would think would be so important?
No, 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 absolutely not. I've always said every other type of investigation I ever did, other than maybe undercover narcotics, every other type of investigation, that you are responding to a crime that has already occurred. And you are in child exploitation too. But when you get to a crime scene, you're witnessing horrific violence. But if you go to a homicide scene, the homicide has already occurred and you are gathering evidence. What you're doing is you're watching the crime occur with CSAM videos. You're literally watching the crime occur, and that feels different.
Absolutely. I remember early in my forensics career, we had an investigation where someone broke into a business and bludgeoned a 17-year-old girl to death.
Mhm.
And it was all on video footage, right? All of it was on camera. And the forensic examiner had to watch this girl getting beaten to death and
Mhm.
listen to her gurgling and screaming over and over and over and over and
Right.
over. Now, that was one of many homicide investigations, and not every single one of them do they have to witness the homicide occurring
Right.
over and over and over. But we do. The people
Right.
doing this crime do, and that's different.
Watching the crime occur, like you said, with homicides, I've watched videos where someone walks up to someone, shoots them point blank in the head. And watching that is different than showing up at a crime scene after that's occurred and you didn't have to watch that. People who are investigating child exploitation crimes, because videos are so prevalent now, are sitting at their desk every day watching children be raped or molested. And it is different than showing up and interviewing a child about a crime that has occurred. And it's horrific enough to listen to them describe it, but watching it occur over and over again is a different feeling. It affects you differently.
Yeah. And there's a theme throughout all the interviews that I'm having with people that is exactly what you're saying. It is different. It's on a whole nother level. And the other point, and you kind of brought this up, was this is an event that occurred. It's over. You show up, you get traumatized by this event, you leave, and then you can deal with whatever that trauma was. You can deal with that past event. This job, you're actually going back to that event every single morning and you're hanging out there all day long for hours and hours and hours and hours. And then you leave and then you come back the next day and you do the same thing. There's no break. There's no, let's think about what happened in the past, because you're in the middle of it every day.
Well, and you also don't know if that child is safe.
Yes.
So
Yes.
sometimes you do, but most of the time you don't. Our protective instincts kick in, and you want to try to find the child and safeguard the child. A child continually being in a situation where they may be sexually assaulted daily, and us knowing that there may still be in that situation also completely weighs on someone's mind.
As horrible as the homicide was, or however terribly that person died, they're at peace. Everybody will agree with that. But not a child, not a live child who is in a situation where this is ongoing and this is potentially a long, horrible future for this child. That's absolutely two different things. And I don't think that belittles a homicide victim in the slightest. But yes, it is two completely different spectrums, in my opinion. And I appreciate you bringing that up because it's true. And it's a common thread. Because law enforcement as a whole is reactive. We respond to the domestic violence. We respond to the call that my house was burglarized. We respond to this, and then we take care of it, and then we write a report. Everybody's whatever, not happy, but everything's taken care of. But I wanted to ask you, like when you were first reading about these things and you were interacting with this team of yours, and I'm sure you're probably, just like every other supervisor, you care about your people.
Absolutely.
Like, did it occur to you that, oh my gosh, my people are, what's going on here? Like, what's happening?
So prior, in ICAC world, wellness, mental wellness has been talked about for longer than it has been a popular topic in mainstream law enforcement. That's getting better in mainstream law enforcement. And when I took over the work unit, it was a topic that was discussed. There's I would say, an evolution of my realization about the mental wellness aspect of child exploitation investigations. So when I got there, our wellness program consisted of an annual check-in with a mental health professional and a group discussion led by, I don't even know who led that group discussion. But that was it. I became the supervisor about the time it was time for everyone's check-ins. And so I went as part of my new job. And I realized very quickly it was a total check the box. Are you having trouble viewing child exploitation material? How's your sleep? Just some very check the box. Took 15 minutes and I was out of there. And I was like, this is not what we need. We're going to really have to work on this program. Everybody at the time was saying, no, I'm fine. I'm fine. It's not bothering me. I'm fine. I'm good. And we don't like looking at it. And yes, we're looking at videos is different than looking at still images. It is horrible content, but I am fine. They were all saying that. But I knew, I was like, okay, but that whole check-in thing is not everything we need. There was talk about if you said it bothered me, then what's going to happen? We did over time take care of that. So I was the supervisor of that work unit for about 8 years. And over the span of time, we built a better wellness program. Certainly not perfect because we had to do it on a budget. If I had all the money in the world, I could build a wonderful wellness program. But what we did was we added over time. I had the benefit of some free things like GBI has a peer support program. Probably in 2018, in the middle of my tenure as the ICAC Commander, the governor created a Georgia Office of Public Safety Support, which had mental health professionals that public safety could use their services. So I had the benefit of some free things, but I did add wellness check-ins and training to my ICAC budget. I didn't have a lot of money to spend, but I did have some money to spend on wellness programs. We started having what I would call wellness retreats. I don't know that my supervisors would like that because a retreat sounds like it's super fun. We're a state agency. The people that I supervised lived all over the state. So somebody was going to have to travel no matter what we did. So we would normally pick a nice location in Georgia, go for 2 days. We would have speakers related to wellness. Sometimes it was yoga for first responders. We had several people who had addiction issues or were suicidal at some point, and they came out of that and they would come back and speak. I call them my story speakers. Or we might watch a webinar. I know Nick had one for a while that was running, that was parenting as an ICAC investigator. We would watch that. We would have our group discussion after that. And let's talk about some of the things that they mentioned in the video. What is it like? Do we parent differently? We do. So we would talk about that in a group discussion, and our group discussions would last a couple of hours. And supervisors weren't allowed in there. I was not in those. They could say anything they wanted to about how supervisors in GBI could make their jobs easier, better. It could be anything from, gosh, I wish we could get new chairs or different lighting in my office, to I need more downtime, or it could be anything. It was really to determine the group discussions, what could we do better? So the supervisors weren't in there. And then we would receive an anonymized summary of, this is what we talked about, but not attributed to anybody. But it was also for the purpose of getting them talking. We would do group discussion and get them thinking, get them talking, and then they would go see their mental health professional. Over time, they've been seeing the same mental health professionals now for 8 or 9 years. And they've developed relationships with their mental health professionals. I always found this interesting. Before each mental health professional met with each individual person, they sent a survey, and the survey is benign. But it wasn't about what was going on at that time. Because they've been seeing them for 8 years and they've been filling out the survey for 8 years, they compare them from year to year. Gosh, it looks like you're not getting as much sleep as you have the last couple of years, or it looks like you're drinking more than you have. Your answers are different this year than they were last year. What the heck's going on? So it was a program that just developed over time.
Just sort of developed over time. Sounds like Debbie Garner doesn't want to take any credit for any of this program. So how did it get developed?
Well, I am very proud of that program, and I did it free. I actually do presentations at ICAC conferences about how to do it on a budget, how to create a mental wellness program for your work unit or your agency. I call them building blocks. Even if you don't have a budget, you can take your work unit half a day, watch a free webinar from NW3C or Shift, then have a group discussion, maybe led by your peer support team if you have one, or you might have to pay a mental health professional to lead that discussion. And then we had to pay for our mental health check-ins. Yeah. And those were about $200 a person. We had quarterly meetings, and once a year it would be focused on wellness. I could not pay for all of the affiliates to have check-ins, but I did encourage their supervisors to come to the wellness meeting, or if they needed me to talk with their supervisor, then we would do that. And I'll tell you an example. We had an affiliate who was having problems viewing CSAM. It was with a local agency, told his supervisor, and his supervisor said, I don't care. We don't have anybody else to do this. Keep doing it. You're the only one. You know how to do these. I don't care. Suck it up. He ended up self-medicating and became an alcoholic. But he was coming to ICAC meetings, and we were talking about wellness. He came to a training that we were putting on, as law enforcement does. They went out one night, and they may have had a few drinks, and he may have had a few more. Told one of his classmates, who he only knew from class, he didn't know this person. He said, I'm 2 pounds away from an 8-pound trigger pull. And so that person that he told basically took his gun that night because he was talking about killing himself. The guy woke up the next morning. The student who had taken the gun told the instructors. The instructors approached him, pulled him out of class, and said, this is what we've been told. He basically collapsed on the floor and said, I need help. I need help. I can't do it anymore. We got him to a law enforcement only addiction clinic that was close by, and he is doing very well now. He actually earned Investigator of the Year in his agency when he went back. We're talking about how supervisors receive this and how some supervisors are not necessarily as understanding. And so when we called his supervisor to tell him what had happened, he was angry because he had caused such a commotion. And we were like, absolutely not. That is not how we're going to view this. That is not how you are going to view this. Because his officer had gone and caused all of this trouble. And we're like, this is not trouble. You would have a dead officer on your hands if he had not spoken out. We had to talk with him and truly try to make him understand really what we were dealing with. And ultimately, they did. As a law enforcement officer, when you are suicidal, there are certain steps you have to take if you're going to want to be a law enforcement officer again. And agencies are navigating through that. There are legitimate fitness for duty issues if you're going to give someone back a gun when they were previously suicidal. But we all worked through that, and he did return as a law enforcement officer. So, and he's doing very well. How was the wellness program received? And it was received well over time. And I know that it works because that is not the only story like that from our task force. People listened and they knew it was a place where if they needed help, they could ask for it.
Do you think this person be in the position he is in now if you had not implemented and made mental health so important?
No, he said he knew if he came to this training that he would possibly be able to get help. It was CRC training. It was Child Rescue Coalition training. And he knew that it was going to be ICAC people there. He knew we had talked about wellness. He knew that I had always told the affiliates that we can't pay for your wellness check-in. Like, there are a lot of things we can't do, but if you need help, you come to us and we will figure that shit out. We will absolutely figure it out. We will get you the help that you need. He may not have gone about it the most direct way, but he knew that he may get help. Afterwards, he said that if his classmate had not intervened, then he absolutely was going to kill himself the next day.
Wow.
He had a plan. He knew exactly how he was going to do it. He came back to the task force, spoke at a meeting, told his story. Part of the most powerful part of that was he said, "Can my wife come and listen? Because I've never told her all of the entire story." And that literally broke my heart. And also made me proud that she was going to now know exactly everything that he had gone through, accomplished, conquered. But I sat next to her. I knew she was coming and I put Kleenex on all the tables at the conference. But he spoke. It was things like that that also brought the task force together and made everyone realize, okay, we are in a safe space. If I do need help, they'll figure it out. And it was powerful because he was accepted back in his agency. It was a complete success story.
Let me ask you this. You mentioned how proud you felt that he was there and his wife was going to be there. Is any of that feeling of pride in yourself for what you've done, what you put together? This man is now thriving and he's getting along with his wife and his family now knows what's going on because of what you years ago made so important?
I think I'm very proud of creating a culture where, and it doesn't stick with everybody, but for the most part, I do along with my work unit and everyone else slowly accepting this program. But yeah, I do have a sense of pride for initiating the creation of a culture where we talked about it a whole lot.
You know, you're the exception to the rule. And my next question was going to be, have you taken this framework to the ICAC Commanders meetings? I assume you had, and discussions about implementing it.
It's not necessarily being implemented around the country, but I do speak at ICAC conferences and honestly other conferences. It's not just ICAC. You can use these, what I call building blocks of wellness webinars, and they're free. Yoga for first responders will come free. There are things that you can do that don't cost anything, and you can have half a day, and then you have a group discussion. So it's not just ICAC related. I have presented on it, and it's very well received. It's not complicated, and it's not expensive because law enforcement doesn't have a whole lot of money.
That's a fact. Do they then take it back and do something with it? Have you heard anything of units that do that? Because Debbie, if you wrote a book like How to Create a Mental Wellness Program on a Budget, I could see the little, whatever for dummies book.
Mm-hmm.
You would be the one. You'd be the one who authored it because you've done it, and B, that little framework, that little would be perfect for because they're all on a budget. No one's going to be like, yeah, we got plenty of money for that. Yeah. Like, it's all on a budget. So, but you have to be able to do these things. And what's crazy to me, so damn interesting, is I've interviewed a couple people already now. My main guy, that this completely destroyed him, and you'll hear it in his interview. Those are the exact suggestions that he made. Have a half day, have a day long conference, bring the family, have the family meet separately with the mental health providers because they're involved with, they know what to look for.
Absolutely.
And then you're sitting here telling me that you've done this. You've created from nothing. And where did that come from? That came from I want to take care of my people. And you cannot deny that. That is, I want to take care of my people.
My biggest stressor as the special agent in charge of the Child Exploitation and Computer Crimes Unit and as the ICAC Task Force Commander was taking care of making sure that my people were okay. It was literally my biggest stressor. We've talked a lot about the images, but there's another wellness issue, and it's the overwhelming caseload. The people that I supervise, and I know that this is true across the country in many work units, but especially ICAC work units. In my work unit, supervise some of the most intelligent, empathetic, passionate, creative people that I've ever come in contact with. They would say, in law enforcement, we learn to compartmentalize, and they would say that the images don't bother me. I can deal with it. I can deal with the images. What kept them up at night and what ultimately caused issues with some of them for burnout and things like that was this overwhelming caseload. In an ICAC world, everybody knows about the increase in cyber tips. This is not news. They had cases on their desk that they knew that there were children attached to those that needed their help and that they may never get to them because they had to constantly prioritize and reprioritize their cases based on information that they were getting in from search warrants that they had executed or subpoenas. They were constantly looking at those and looking at all of the facts and reprioritizing them. But they had 100 of those. And they knew that they would never get to them, and they knew that they would likely miss children who would stay in a situation where they were not getting the help that they needed, that they could be regularly being raped by someone that they know. And that is what really mentally caused the harm to the people that I supervised, more so than looking at the images. And the images are horrific. But knowing they would never get to kids that they knew needed their help tore them up.
That is profound, that the caseload itself. But when you think about it, that's absolutely correct. It's like that recurring nightmare that we'll have where they can't pull the trigger. They're trying to get to the surface of the water and they never make it. Or they see someone they know, but they turn the corner before they can. That's the nightmare that people live. But it sounds like that's the nightmare your investigators are living when they're not sleeping. That is their life. That's not a dream that they're having. It's their recurring existence. Wow.
They are taking time away from their families. They were working too long because if they could just finish this search warrant, if they could just read this one more search warrant return, if they could just get through that information on that search warrant return, or that they were working too much. They were literally taking time away from their own families to help other families. And they were damaging their own relationships because they mentally could not cut the ties of knowing that there was a child out there that may be raped that night. And they couldn't get to them because there was just not enough time to get to them all. And I know we had to start deprioritizing some cases because there were just too many. We had to establish criteria, but everybody would still say, oh, but I'm fine. The pictures bother me, but I'm fine. I'm fine. The overwhelming caseload, it bothers me, but I'm fine. The average burnout time for ICAC investigators is around 7 years. So I supervised that work unit for 8 years. Cyber tips were increasing. Their caseload never decreased. It only ever increased. And burnout was real. Well, I'm thinking, okay, we're doing a great job. We've built this mental wellness program. They're fine. They say they're fine. I know now better that they were not. They were fine in that they would be fine, but they probably needed a break.
How do you address the mental health support of when it's caseload that you can't do a thing about?
It's a hard thing as a supervisor. How do you tell someone it's not just your responsibility to save kids? It's a catch-22 for everyone. How do you tell somebody, go home and tend to your own family? As your supervisor, I am telling you, you can't get to them all. I even feel horrible telling them to do that. They feel horrible doing it. but it's also to create a culture of it's okay. You are doing the best you can. You are doing the absolute best that you can, and making them believe that. But at the same time, they still know they're not getting to them all. It helps in one way. You're doing the best you can. Keep doing what you're doing, but you have to take care of yourself. You have to take care of yourself. You're not going to be able to help anybody else. So making them believe that, like truly believe that, is part of the answer. And then establishing criteria by which we were going to prioritize or deprioritize cases. We know that's not best practice to not investigate or to deprioritize some cases, but if you physically can't do it, how do you pick out the ones where you're going to have the most success? It's to safeguard a child. So we would prioritize cases, and when you do that, others get deprioritized, and that's where the mental mind F comes. That's where it is, So it is, as a supervisor, how do you help them with that? You make them believe that they are genuinely doing the very best that they can and to take care of themselves, or they can't help other people.
Case log is always going to be an issue. Money's always going to be an issue. Personnel is always going to be an issue.
Yes.
But what's interesting to me is that these people are responding that they're fine. I can't tell you how many people I have contacted for this podcast to talk about their career. They're retired. One of the longest standing ICAC commanders that will not talk to me because he breaks up when he starts talking about it. And Debbie, that bothers me so much. Can you imagine having to compartmentalize your entire adult career because you can't even think about the work that you were doing? Like, you can't even be proud of all the investigations, all the things that you've done, because you can't physically, mentally, emotionally go there. How the fuck are we leaving people like this?
Yeah, that's insightful.
We're putting people through a fucking sausage grinder. This is all I want for the rest of the world. People leave this job healthy. Whatever the fuck that takes,
right?
Leave healthy. We're going to have backlog. It's going to suck. It's going to this. It's going to that. It's going to be terrible. Well, guess what? We make it happen. We're not great at it. We're terrible at it, but we're doing something. Debbie, there are so many people out there, and I only know a handful of people in the big scheme of things, and a big percentage of the ones I know are fucked up. That's telling me that everybody out there is fucked. It's terrible. Sorry.
I met someone a few months ago for the first time, and I probably only spoke with him 3 or 4 times. And it was in a work setting. It became obvious just in a few conversations with him that it had left him scarred. He was an ICAC investigator, and he was very open about it, but I don't know that he was getting the help that he needed.
What's interesting is Jim Cole told me that he is proactively going to see a therapist because he's like, nothing's wrong with me. I don't think there is, but there's no possible way I did all that for all these years and it didn't get in there and screw something up. So he's like, even he acknowledges this podcast is for one person. This podcast is for one person. It's for that person that is doing this job and is dying inside, that is destroying themselves, but for whatever reason, they're not getting help. Either it's not available for them or they don't have the personality to ask for help. Maybe they can quietly listen to this and realize I'm not the only one that thinks like this. If I can back one investigator off the ledge, just like the story you told me where your framework backed an individual off, there is absolutely no doubt that he was 100% going to say something because he just needed to drink and get to the point where he could do it because he knew.
Yep. That's exactly what happened.
And if he didn't have the knowledge that he had a framework and he had a system in place that takes care of him as a person, then what would be the incentive for him to talk to anybody? I think he knew action was going to happen. I don't know the situation, and thank God it did.
No, I think he knew that it was a big possibility that if he said something, that something would happen. He had no idea what, and he said something to the right person in his class who didn't know him. And that person did the right thing and told the instructors, who then were like, okay, we're gonna check this out. We're gonna We're going to talk to him. We're going to do something. And kudos to him again for when he was asked when he was sober, hey, what's going on? That he literally 100% right out of the gate was like, I need help. Because he could have easily said, oh my God, I was drunk. I didn't mean to say that. No, I need help immediately.
People don't realize how difficult it is for law enforcement to ask for help. It is an immediate sign of weakness in your own mind. Outwardly, nobody thinks you're weak because you're saying this stuff got to me. Nobody thinks that, but you think everybody does. It's just you that has this.
Right.
It's insane to me. It's the biggest problem in law enforcement is not having the ability to raise your hand and say, this is bothering me and I need some kind of interaction. I don't need to leave per se. I'm not done with this material, but I can see it's bothering me and I want some support here. What's wrong with that? And what you've done, Debbie, is you've created the system that gives those people the support that they don't even know they need, that they won't ask for. It's phenomenal.
We knew each other so well that we knew when somebody was off. So it could just be something like they had a fight with their spouse, or they're having trouble taking care of an aging parent, or whatever it is. It doesn't have to be work related. It became a regular occurrence for people to just say, you seem a little off, anything going on, you want to talk. That was a regular occurrence in our office. But that developed over time. And I know a lot of law enforcement work units are very close and they're all friends. But it's still hard sometimes to say, hey, are you okay? You seem like you just don't seem yourself today. It becomes an easy question to ask if you have the right culture and if it just becomes a regular thing. But it's a learned thing, and you have to create the environment where it's okay.
And you have created that environment. You have a culture. You created a culture of caring. People that worked for you know or knew.
They did care about each other. They absolutely cared about each other.
We can bring you into this too. At any point you want, Debbie, we can bring you right into this, okay? Because I'm pretty sure you had a really big part.
I'll take a little bit of the credit, but they were receptive though, which is credit to them as well.
But being receptive is also a product of knowing that, and it's from a safe place. Debbie's she's not just trying to get us into some meeting so they can flush us out of the unit. I would imagine you've probably never supervised or worked in an area where caring wasn't in the forefront of things. It sounds like you're a pretty caring person and you're open about that with people.
I mean, I'm not going to lie. The agency that I worked for was pretty phenomenal and had its issues. I'm not saying it was perfect by any means. Good grief. But the agency genuinely wanted to do what was right for the people.
Which used to be the exception to the rule. Now it's slowly becoming the rule. But it's becoming the rule because people like you have implemented wellness programs on a budget. Honestly, it sounds like you created a culture of caring. I would love nothing more than to interview one of the people that worked for you that maybe has retired and gone on to get their perspective from what the wellness program was like that you created. If somebody wants to talk about this and how your program backed them off the ledge, that is gold right there, because that can help another person. There is another person out there that is in a similar situation to the story you just told me. I'm sure there's thousands of them out there right now, younger folks that need the help. We're in this big culture change right now where we're going from suck it up, put some dirt on it, to no, it's okay, let's take care of our people long term. I've worked in a unit where there was no culture of wellness whatsoever. The culture was, if you say something, everyone's going to make fun of you behind your back.
I can't even imagine. I feel very lucky, but that would be horrific.
You laugh because if you don't laugh, you cry, but then the laughter becomes cynical, right? And it becomes cutting, and that's not good. It becomes hurtful and just plain mean. And what was meant to be levity now just causes people more stress. So Shift goes out and offers one-day free trainings, and they're grant funded by OJGDP, just like the ICACs are.
We did it. What was one of the free things that we did?
But there are ICAC units that are saying, I don't have time for that.
Okay, that's bullshit. That's bullshit. Create the time. You have to prioritize taking care of your people, or they're not going to be able to do their job. And more than that, don't you want to take care of your people? I don't understand the concept of just running them ragged and making them work their ass off. I had very high expectations for the people that worked for me. We had a very important job to do and a shit ton of work. But I still, again, my biggest stressor was making sure they had what they needed to do their job, including making sure they were well. Now, could we have done more? Absolutely. I would have loved to have done more, but more would have likely taken more money. There was some discussion over time to starting 2 wellness check-ins. Now, we did 2 wellness retreats every year, but they only saw their mental health provider once. So twice a year, we would do resiliency training or have speakers. We would do the free webinars. We would do that. And then a group discussion. And our peer support team was there to talk, and the mental health professionals were there to talk that were free from our Office of Public Safety Support. They were there to talk if someone needed to, but they weren't doing the wellness check-in that cost us money. So it morphed over time, but when I was leaving, there was discussion about going to 2 wellness check-ins a year. If I had 35 people and it's 200, so that's $7,000. So it would cost me $15,000 a year to do 2 wellness check-ins. I think that's completely worth it. And I don't think that fits in people's budgets if they want it to.
That's the key, is if they want it to.
Mm-hmm.
So Debbie, when you were developing, building, and iterating your mental health apparatus over time, what was the hardest thing for you to overcome? What was the biggest struggle in doing it all?
Wanting to do more and needing more money. I will say my direct supervisor, whose rank would be called inspector, she was over the peer support team for the GBI. She was very into wellness. So I had support from my direct supervisor as well. But I guess my biggest struggle would have been money. And it doesn't matter if it's ICAC or not. Our crime scene specialists started doing something very similar to what we were doing. Group discussions, that sort of thing. I know that people have maybe a cookout. If you have your cookout and maybe you have a speaker, maybe you have yoga for first responders, or maybe you have one of these, somebody to come and tell their story. Maybe you watch a webinar or listen to a podcast about you do something related to wellness at your cookout. And then you do your group discussion, and then you have your cookout. Maybe you have 15 minutes of roll call training, and you concentrate on wellness. Local patrol officers, maybe you do roll call training. I know that's not ICAC related, but I think that there are ways to fit things in. You just have to be creative and find them. I know that work units have office meetings. Don't work units have office meetings occasionally? Watch a webinar for an hour on resiliency. Do that 3 or 4 times a year. Nothing's going to be perfect, but I think you can fit in things into what you're already doing.
I'm going to play devil's advocate right now. But Debbie, your caseload is so big. You just told me how massive this caseload is, and these kids are suffering. So now you're going to take a whole unit away from a day. That's another day you're falling behind.
Yep. That is absolutely true. But again, you have to take care of your people or they're going to burn out, and then where will you be? The protectors need taken care of as well. And I think it's critically important, or they will be much more efficient, much more productive after a day or 2 away where they are talking about resiliency, talking about some of these feelings that they have, and they go back refreshed. Maybe not.
They have the opportunity to. At least they have the chance. Yeah.
Yes.
So how do you get to the person that doesn't want help, that doesn't think they want help? How do you get to that person that needs this training, that needs to show up, that never comes?
So we made our wellness meetings mandatory. Now they had to see the mental health professional, but they did not have to talk. They had to go, but if they didn't want to talk, if they didn't want to answer the questions.
That's been a big controversial topic amongst the ICACs, is should investigators and examiners have to go mandatorily to a mental health provider? It always gets back to fitness for duty. Am I going to be kicked out if I say anything? I'm exactly in alignment with you. I'm going to put you in a room with somebody. You can talk. You can tell everybody, all your buddies on your squad, this is stupid. Fuck this. I don't know what this stupid shit is. Just like the gangbanger that you arrest out on the street, who's all tough until you get him into the interrogation room, and then he's crying like a 12-year-old. Same thing. And I don't care who you are. You're going to sit in the room with somebody for an hour. You're going to start talking about something. Uncomfortable silence will keep you every time. Yeah. And whether or not they want to get help or not, they can. And if they go in there and they get help and they let everything out and they go out, they can still say, God, that was stupid. That's stupid shit. They can still be the tough guy on the outside, but at least they're getting exposure because we know we've already established that we're really bad about saying, I need help. So for you to put them in that's all that is. Mandatory is such a scary word in law enforcement. People get really anxious when they hear that. But all this is giving you opportunity to get help if you need to, period.
Sure. The wellness check-ins with a mental health provider is simply to see if everything's okay, and to initiate a referral somewhere. I never knew who said what or anything. I'll tell you about the anonymized report that I got in just a minute. They're not just talking about CSAM or their overwhelming caseload. They are talking about that, but a lot of them, our personal issues are sometimes way worse than stuff. We know how to deal with stuff at work, but personal issues sometimes we don't know how to deal with. So the mental health providers would have referrals for financial planning. They would have referrals to social workers to help with aging parents, or if your child was just diagnosed with dyslexia or autism or what, and it was a challenge, they would have referrals for that. It was really more of a, hey, what are you dealing with? How can we help? It wasn't necessarily a therapy session. It was more of a check-in and see if everything's okay, and if not, how can we get you help? So I would get an anonymized report afterwards that basically would say, we saw this many people. Overall, the culture seems to be great. They seem to be very open. These are 3 issues that seem to be a theme, and overwhelming workload, things like that. And then they would say, we made 2 referrals to outside services. And that would be it. That's all I would get. As a supervisor, all I needed was, are there themes that I need to work on? Are there things that I can help with by changing policy, procedure, criteria? Are there things that I can do that will, there may not be. A little bit about the group discussions. So we had 35 people. Because when you talk about people talking or not, that was also strategic. Supervisors had their own group. We were not involved in any of the group discussions with anybody who was not a supervisor. We divided the rest, about 30 people, up into 2 groups, and it was sworn and non-sworn. It was a mix of everything, and no group was the same each time. So it was sworn and non-sworn. It was agents and digital forensics. It was administrative. It was talkers and non-talkers. I determined the groups. Some people who talk and some people who don't talk. And, it was a mix of people each time. And if I knew a couple of people maybe were not getting along at the time, I would separate them. They would not be in the same group. That was strategic also. But the idea of the entire progression was webinar, speaker, resiliency training, whatever that was, then move into the group discussion and talk about a variety of things, parenting as an ICAC investigator. There was one time where we did ask the supervisors anything fishbowl. So they could put any question that they wanted into there, and the supervisor would answer that, and then leave, and then they could talk about our answers, things like that. And then after the group discussion where everybody was talking, and surprisingly, I always heard that virtually everyone talked. Everyone talked. And then they would go to their mental health professional already in a mindset where they were talking.
Did you quietly take pride in the fact that they were talking because you set it up that way?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. The fact that they were talking was really all I wanted. I didn't care what they talked about.
What's the thing you are the most proud of that you left legacy-wise?
So I'll say 2 things. One we've talked about, and one is personal. Creating a culture where it's okay to talk about maybe not feeling okay, whether that's professional or personal. And one of the other things that I'm most proud, and it's career related. No, it is, but it's also personal related. My office was, at one point, the sworn personnel were 75% female. And I think it's probably half and half right now. But they were in the stage of their life while I was supervising them where they were either pregnant or they were having their 2 kids apiece. Yeah. Now, some of their kids are anywhere between 2 or 3, actually infants, and maybe up to 9 or so. They had watched me raise my kids. My kids are in college now, but my kids were their kids' age when I started supervising them. In law enforcement, we all grow up with each other. We all know each other's kids, especially with social media now. So they watched me raise my kids. And one of the things that I did with my kids was travel a lot, have them experience things that they had never experienced before. And I was very open about taking time off to be with my family. I wanted to do things with them and not have things. There came a point where they didn't even know what to ask for Christmas. We aren't rich, but there wasn't anything that they wanted. So I was like, all right, well, then we're going to go on trips. And we did crazy things like swimming with sharks out in the ocean, not in a cage, and hang gliding. You know, we went to all kinds of national parks and hiked the Narrows and Zion and like all these things. And I remember many times the agents that I supervised coming to me and saying, that is exactly what I want to do with my kids, because it's so hard to travel with kids. It's so, it's actually not. It's fun. I enjoy helping people and watching people experience things that they've never experienced before. And so as I now watch these agents raise their kids, they're doing the same thing. I just was on Facebook looking at pictures of one of the agents I used to supervise, and she and her children were in Japan. And they have expressed that several times that they do these things because they watched me do them.
That's amazing. So cool.
There were the people that I supervised, but they watched me also have that work-life balance.
And you could do this job and you could successfully raise a family.
That's what they said. That's what they said too. I think people knew my personality, and I have been accused of being irritatingly optimistic to the point of, my God, she's so positive. And I think that they knew that's who I was. So they did accept the fact that, okay, this is what we're doing. This is the culture we're building. And I think there were a couple of things that occurred that made them realize that this was necessary. We did have someone in our work unit who became suicidal, and we worked through that. And it was, no one knew it was going on when it was occurring. And that was for a few months. No one knew it was going on. And once that was resolved, this person wanted to tell the work unit his experience. And when he did, everyone realized that it had been completely anonymous. They had no idea that any of this was going on. Nobody talked. Nobody was spreading gossip. The supervisors weren't telling anybody. It was completely secret, which you know how hard that is in law enforcement, to keep anything a secret. And I think things like that occurred made them trust the process that we had put in place, because when they saw it happen to somebody else, one of their best friends was now telling them this is what had happened, and this is the process. This is how GBI had supported them. This is what happened. They were stunned. First of all, there were all kinds of emotions, but one of the things was they had no clue that it was going on, and they learned to trust that if they had the same issue, we would have handled it the same way. So things like that occurred that, again, made them trust the process
that you created.
But there are things that occurred that validated the process for everyone.
In that moment, him telling the story is instant validation. For you, you probably were like, oh my God,
yes,
this is, yeah.
Absolutely. And I was involved in the whole thing. I knew what was going on, but they looked at me and said, you didn't tell anybody anything. There were people that knew, but no one in the work unit knew except who needed to know. The only reason they were finding out is because he chose to tell them. And part of the reason he chose to was for this very reason. This was the process I went through, and I was super impressed with the anonymity and the trust that it wasn't going to get out until he wanted it to. And that GBI was supporting him. He had to jump through some hoops to come back, but he did, and he was able to actually come back and be a law enforcement officer.
All because of the systems that you put into place, because it meant enough to you to take whatever budget you could use, whatever money you could scrape together, because you put wellness way up in the front.
It was a priority. It was a priority.
You absolutely cracked the code by slowly introducing them. You didn't push anything in their face, you know. It sounds like the way you set it up would be an example for any other ICAC unit to set something up, like you said, on a budget, right?
I believe so. I think you have to think outside the box. I think you have to get rid of some old ways of thinking. I think you have to make some concessions for time. You have to prioritize it. You played devil's advocate and you said, but what about all the cases? I think it's a morphing of a way of thinking, and you create the time, you find the time. I think that there are ways to do it. One of my least favorite phrases is, this is the way that we've always done it, though. And I think you have to get out of that way of thinking and make it happen.
Thank you, Debbie, for taking the time out of your day to share your story with others, to make sure that this information gets passed along to those that need to hear it. For that, I'm eternally grateful. But more importantly, thank you for what you've implemented. And thank you for cultivating a culture in which people felt they were human beings that were cared for. Thank you for listening to Harmless the Podcast. As always, if you know somebody that needs to hear this podcast, please let them know. If you'd like them to hear it anonymously, send me an email to harmlessthepodcast@gmail.com, and I will make sure they hear it. Thank you.